and welcome to the Mentor Movement Podcast. I am your host, Kylie Montigney. The Mentor Movement explores the impact of mentorship in various industries from corporate to entertainment and how it's shaping the future of our work. Today, we'll be talking to Sadie Sutton about mental health, anxiety, and depression. If you're a fan of the show, please do remember to subscribe and leave a review, which will be greatly appreciated. But welcome to the show, Sadie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm so glad to be here and thank you for having me.
It's so great to catch up with you again. I know the last two episodes we had were podcast reunions, and this happens to be our third, which is insane. It feels like this podcast is some sort of reunion, which is something I did not expect.
It's
But with your podcast, before we dive into the other things, but how has your podcast been going?
been good. We're getting closer to 200 episodes, which is crazy, and just chugging along. We started doing little mini episodes on Monday, which is really fun. And yeah,
Crazy. We're literally on my other podcast, we're literally about to hit 300 episodes, which is
that's
it's really
crazy.
insane to think about, 300 episodes. So each milestone is like, how are we reaching 300 episodes? That's something that I did
Yeah,
not expect at all. I'm sure it's the same for you as well.
yeah.
To dive into your work and everything you're doing, like tell us kind of more about you and the amazing work that you're doing.
Yeah, so I am a incoming senior at the University of Pennsylvania studying psychology, and my kind of journey in the mental health field, subjectively and objectively, began in middle school. I struggled a lot with depression and anxiety, and early on, I didn't even recognize that that was what was happening. I thought that maybe my brain just worked different, or I wasn't as happy as other people, or I just didn't really understand what I was experiencing. There was just a lot of overwhelm and shifts in mood and energy and sleep and things like that. And by the time I reached eighth grade, I was really struggling in a lot of ways with depression primarily. And that showed up with conflict in family and performing differently in school, different friendships, kind of withdrawing from more relationships, struggling to talk about what I was experiencing, all of that kind of stuff. And kind of culminated halfway through my eighth grade year, and I was hospitalized for the first time for depression. And from that point onward, it was kind of just trying everything to shift my mood and these kind of behaviors that were popping up as a byproduct of this depression and anxiety. And I ended up being hospitalized three more times. And I did intensive outpatient twice through. I did outpatient DBT two times, everything that you can imagine from a local standpoint, whether it was CBT or group therapy, psychotherapy, occupational therapy, you name it, we tried it, and we weren't seeing a shift in mood and those relationships and the behaviors that had been popping up. And so halfway through my freshman year of high school, my treatment team and my family decided that the best step would be to pursue a more intensive level of treatment. And so I ended up going to a residential treatment program outside of Boston. It's called 3 East at McLean Hospital, and they do incredible work. I can't recommend them enough. They take a really evidence-based approach, which is really important. There's a lot of family involvement, and they're just the most compassionate and competent group of clinicians that I've ever interacted with. And I ended up being there for 14 weeks, and I went in suicidally depressed, anxious, really no relationship with my parents, and left no longer waking up every day depressed and unable to cope with and understand my anxiety, and having built a foundation of communication and relationship with my parents, which was super important. And after that, I did 14 months at a therapeutic boarding school, which was in the troubled teen industry. And so that was a whole other experience. And then at the end of it, I realized I'd done this complete 180 with regards to my mental health. I did a complete 180 with my mental health. I was no longer so depressed. I was feeling hopeful for my future. I felt like I had the skills that I needed to navigate any challenges that I encountered for the rest of high school. And it's this really interesting dynamic that takes place when you're a teen that's struggling and pursuing treatment, because you're really in a vacuum chamber. If you're struggling, you're only surrounded by other teens that are struggling because they're the ones that are in group therapy or DBT with you or whatever it is. But if you're not struggling, no one's talking about what they're doing that's working or why their mental health is good or how they maintain that. Teens aren't really in the self-help industry as much as adults are. And so
Mhm.
I really wanted to share my experience because I struggled to believe adults that told me it would get better. I was like, you don't get what I'm going through. You're an adult, you have more autonomy. And so I felt really compelled to share my own experience. And I also knew that a lot of what I went through was preventable. And so if I shared the skills I learned and the insights I gained and the shifts I made, I hope that would help other teens. And so that was I started the podcast my right before my junior year of high school. And so it's been like 5 years now, which is absolutely crazy. And I'm really working to create the resource that I wish I would have had and just continuing to up level the insights that I'm bringing, and making sure things are backed in research and not only sharing those subjective experiences, but also objectively what we know works. And so it's been really cool to pull in things I've learned at Penn and just continue to bring those insights along with sharing my own journey. And so I absolutely love it. And I hope to become a clinical psychologist and just continue to share those experiences with the podcast audience. And yeah, it's been really incredible.
That's really great. Like, that's something that, honestly, I've struggled with is anxiety, depression. I had anxiety since I was a little kid. Ever since I was probably was able to speak, I had anxiety, and later on, I was later diagnosed with anxiety disorder, which I really didn't know about until like 2 years ago. Because I basically didn't know about it, but I knew with my anxiety that there was some sort of diagnosis to it because how bad it got a few years ago and kind of, how persistent it was. And with having anxiety, depression, it can also lead you to one of those programs that you were in, but it's not a horrible ball or a good thing. It's just something that would help you relieve that sort of pressure that's going on in your mind at the moment. And I was in like a program yesterday with a bunch of my friends at this local farm down the road from my house in Pennsylvania. And basically with this farm, well, they sell ice cream, cows, just a regular farm, like milk and everything, dairy. And basically when these two speakers that worked at the farm that we were at came in, there's a one girl that I knew, named Suzanne, who was that works there, but I forget her specific role, that she was saying that they started her grief camp, like which is part of the Hillside Farm thing for teenagers from like ages 4 to like 13 that have lost a loved one or have witnessed some sort of traumatic thing in their life, whether they watched your mom or dad die or whatever it may be. So the whole program is based off of, grief and everything they suffered. And she mentioned that at first when the program started, they wouldn't really talk to others about how they were feeling and kind of felt ashamed and like everything that surrounds it. But by the end of the program, maybe a few weeks later, they're relatively telling the people that were in the program that they're like similar ages what they've been through and talking about what they've been through at such a young age where no person at such a young age should have to go through. And it really shows that talking about your feelings is very important to see when you talk about your feelings, it relatively makes an impact on others because when people talk about it, they have some sense of connection to feeling like, oh my God, I'm not alone in this. And it makes them find more confident in speaking out about a certain subject, such as anxiety and depression.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. I think one of the biggest takeaways I had from treatment and therapy in general is that when we avoid things, it only amplifies the experience. And that's especially true for our emotional experiences when we're not feeling those emotions and processing them and speaking to others about them, it becomes really overwhelming and really isolating. And I think a lot of these core experiences are really universal, and a lot of these things exist kind of on a spectrum. And a lot of people can relate to what you're experiencing, even if it isn't to the same degree or the same severity. A lot of those feelings of, am I good enough? Am I worthy? How do I show up as my best self in relationships? How do I pursue these goals that I have in my life? A lot of those are really universal experiences, and they feel isolating, so we don't talk about them. But talking about them is one of the most important and powerful things that we can do.
It really could. Like speaking about certain subject can be honestly so powerful, more than actual words. You know, speaking about anxiety, depression is becoming more popular by the day. Like years ago in our parents' generation, they really didn't talk about it because that's the thing that people didn't do. But since, our generation's going on, more people are talking about it, which is amazing because people should speak up for their feelings and not feel ashamed about, people hitting on them for how they're feeling or went through their diagnosis or people just kicking out of their household because they're feeling like that. Like no one ever has to feel judged or ashamed just because they're feeling a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree.
But of course, in terms of mentors, like how can mentors foster a safe and supportive environment for mentees to discuss mental health concerns?
Yeah, I think in the mental health world, it finding a mentor can be a challenging and kind of nuanced experience. I think I always lean towards finding a therapist or a clinician because they are the ones that have gone to school and have the training and the regulations. And there's a lot of checks and balances in place to ensure that you have the best possible outcomes when it comes to getting help and trying to get support. Um, just like if you broke your leg, you wouldn't go to your neighbor who broke their leg previously. You would go to a doctor because a doctor is the one that is equipped with the skills and the tools and the system and the resources to be able to help you in that situation. And mental health is the exact same way. And especially when you're struggling in a really big way, and the feelings and the thoughts that you're having are really overwhelming, the best equipped and most effective person to go to is a clinician. And sometimes you need help getting in touch with a clinician or getting taking that step to get to therapy. And that's where, especially as a teen, talking to a parent or a family friend or a coach or a teacher, school counselor, etc. Pediatrician is another great option to say, I'm feeling this way. I don't know what to do. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I don't know if I can go to my parents and talk about this. That can be helpful to kind of get you in touch. But when it comes to really getting mental health support and working through these really big and overwhelming feelings, and maybe it's trauma, maybe it's relationship conflicts, whatever it is, um seeing a therapist is really one of the best things that you can do. And if you're looking for recommendations, sometimes schools have lists of clinicians that they recommend and work with. Your pediatrician is another great option. But I definitely would direct people towards finding a clinician and one that works with an evidence-based modality like TBT or CBT, so that when you're putting in all this work and being so vulnerable and sharing these experiences, you're giving yourself the best chance of success when it comes to your outcome. And when it comes to more day-to-day preventative mental health things, I think that's where having like accountability buddies or a more informal mentor can be helpful, because just like going to therapy and doing the hard work and talking about childhood experiences or all those things, um, is important. The day to day is also really what's going to maintain and prevent mental health challenges. And that means getting enough sleep and getting movement and being outside and having healthy relationships and doing things that bring you joy and having that sense of purpose. And those more informal habits and behaviors are things that non clinicians can help you work towards and work through. And so I think that's kind of that happy medium where you can get support and more of a mentor. But I do think surrounding yourself with people that are kind and compassionate and speak to themselves in really kind and compassionate ways, and have that sense of purpose, and their mental health is what you're looking for in your own life as well. I think that is worth pursuing. We kind of attract the energy we put out, and there's been so many studies that show that the number one determinant and what our lives look like is the people that we surround ourselves with.
Mm.
And I think in mental health that can be challenging because when you're really sad and depressed and anxious and overwhelmed, you tend to gravitate towards people that also have those shared experiences because it's really validating and you're like, they get it. They know what my lived experience is. And if your goal for yourself is to overcome those things, surrounding yourself with people who have been through that, or are maintaining and preventing mental health challenges, that can also be really encouraging and powerful.
It really could be that encouraging to surround yourself with those people because when you surround yourself with people that have the shared experiences, it makes you feel so much overwhelmed with certain things. These other people went through it, so you have more of a connection in terms of resources and what they went through and kind of what helped them during that part of their life, which can be so powerful. But with mental health, there's so many ways and tools you can really get help and get mentors, such as maybe a school therapist, a psychologist, and or so many other things. If you don't want to go to your parents to talk about it, because of course now a lot of people like to go to their parents for these certain things. So there's honestly many ways and go, like your family member, or just, a very good friend, anyone that you can talk to could be so impactful. Um, if you don't want to go to your parents, 'cause I know a lot of people might not want to go to their parents in that certain situation. Because, sometimes they feel so ashamed to really talk to their parents about those things, which could be so acceptable.
Yeah, 100%.
How has, really mental health really impacted your life over the last couple of years? I know you really deep dived a little bit into that when you're in high school and everything before, but what kind of really mental health really impacted your life?
Yeah, I think I was lucky in a way that I went through my mental health challenges pretty early on in life. I my like rock bottom and point of really struggling was in middle school and high school. And so I was backed into a corner where I had to learn these skills. And it was like my survival was dependent on it to learn how to cope with these things in a healthier way and to learn how to ask for help and to learn how to ride the wave of these emotions. And that was kind of more of an extreme case. I think a lot of people struggle with these emotions, and it just because you're not in a hospital or in a residential treatment program doesn't mean that that experience isn't valid or really painful and distressing to navigate. So I was lucky in that I built that foundation for my mental health in high school. And so when I transitioned to college and started to be more independent and my mental health was more reflective of the habits I was building and choices I was making rather than just going through the motions of the environment that was created for me, which is kind of what we see happens in high school. It's like you go to school for 8 hours a day and then you have your extracurriculars, then you're doing family dinner. And so the amount of time that you actually have autonomy and are making these choices is pretty minimal. Whereas you get to college and you're like, there's so much time in the day. And if you decide to meet up with friends, or go to the dining hall or enroll in certain classes, that is going to have a much stronger impact on your mental health because you're making so many of those choices. You really are for the first time like building your life. And so I was lucky in that I had that foundation and I was really aware of what impacts my mental health and how important relationships are and having daily routines and making sure that I had these passion projects that I was really interested in. I felt engaged and interested in the classes that I was taking, that I was pursuing these larger goals. And so in college, it's really been about maintaining that foundation and continuing to do things from a preventative perspective. And I kind of bring it back to the 80-20 rule, which I think most people have heard of in some context. But I think about like if I'm doing things that are good for my mental health 80% of the time, and that could be getting movement, seeing friends, talking positively to myself, not consuming content that makes me feel negative, pursuing these larger goals, asking for help, etc., then even if there's that 20% of the time that I can't control, or I'm having a stressful day, or I'm really didn't do well on a test or whatever it is, I'm still moving on a positive trajectory. And mental health generally is like going up and improving. And so that's
Mm.
kind of my goal with how I approach things. And I think the podcast has been really great because
That's
it's,
that's
yeah, it's
great. That you really had that set of goal. Was not a lot of people even realize that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and then the podcast has been great because it's forced me to revisit and reflect on these things. And it's really forced me to reflect on these things and continue to grow my awareness of how do you maintain your mental health and other people's experiences and all these different nuances and the research that's around. And so that's been really fun to have that as a constant. And I think it's also helped me stay on track with regard to my own mental health, which has been a benefit I didn't expect going into it.
I love it. Like podcasting can be so impactful to talk with other people and to really share your experiences. So it can impact your other people. Because I know with talking about your own journey, it can be so impactful and very hard to do because not a lot of people have the guts to talk about what you went through. I know it was very hard for me personally to talk about different things, but it really can be so good for you to get it out there and talk to other people about it because it's very good not to keep it in. It's very unhealthy if you're just going to keep it inside. It's just only going to make it worse if you keep it inside and you're just making all your emotions inside you just hurtling, which is not healthy. And to have such a platform to talk about it, like podcasting, can make things easier for other individuals that are dealing with maybe depression or anxiety to really find a therapist or seek help to really figure out, okay, how can I make life better for myself? Or if someone's maybe juggling maybe school, maybe family dinner and stuff, that's something that I oftentimes struggle with is, having that time management between maybe school, my jobs, or maybe my activities like this. It can be very difficult to manage. But as long as you maybe ask someone to be like, hey, how can I time manage this? Or what do I care about the most that I should juggle in my day? Can be so important because you don't want to come into every day feeling so exhausted, sleep deprived, or just, very burnt out because that's not healthy. And if you're doing that every single day, you need to find a solution to figure out, like, okay, what's important to me? What can I get out? My every single day that maybe I can do maybe at least once a week or something to have time for myself and also for my family as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really true, and I think that's something that I've had to be really cognizant of the past couple of years. There's so many things you can choose to do in high school and
Mhm.
college, and there's like endless opportunities when it comes to the classes you're taking and the clubs you're joining and the friends you're making. Like there are so many different ways you can spend your time, and so I've tried to kind of make a hierarchy of like, okay, what goals am I pursuing? And where do I see my life in 10, 15 years? And what am I doing today that's going to help me get to that point? And so that's kind of how I've been able to prioritize things like the classes I'm taking or what I'm doing for work, how I'm spending my summer. And then also there's like the day to day of like, how do I create a sense of purpose and productivity and make sure I have commitments to show up to? Because that's really important. And
Mhm.
do those fit into that larger goal? And then there also those elements of okay, and then what is really important for my mental health? Like how much time am I spending with people? How am I making time to take care of basic needs like sleep and nutrition and movement? And also just taking breaks because that's really important. I think a lot of students struggle with burnout and overwhelm. And so I'm like very aware of what my limits are and when it's time to pull back because it has to be sustainable.
It really has. To wrap up this episode, this is something that I love asking people at the end of each episode. But what does a mentorship mean to you?
Yeah, I think in an ideal situation, a mentor has been through your goals and your challenges, whether it's a career path, whether it's personal growth, whether it is something related to your education, and they're able to share their insights and systems and help you apply that in your own life. I think they are able to share wisdom from their own experiences and help you avoid some of that trial and error and give you a better chance of success. And I think there's also that level of emotional support and validation and that communication that it's okay. I've been through this too. It's completely normal and this will be challenging, but you absolutely have the skills to get through it and I'll be there to support you. And I think
Mhm.
as a mentee, I think there's a lot of things that you can do to get the best outcome possible. And I think it comes with a lot of respect for your mentor. I think it's being
Mhm.
really cognizant of their time and how you're helping them. I think it's a two-way relationship. I think especially as a student, whether it's a teacher or a professor, or if you're into research and you're working in a lab, how are you serving them and giving them some kind of ROI on helping you? And really that being a two-way relationship. And I think from both sides, there's a lot of preparation to make sure that those interactions are as beneficial as possible. And whether that's doing research before or preparing questions or being really clear on what your goals are, I think that's kind of what comes to mind when it comes to mentorship.
You literally explained it very well. A mentorship can mean so many things, especially with mental health. It can be very hard to find a mentor, specifically mental health, compared to maybe job opportunities or just getting into a career field. It's much harder than those two certain things. But when you find a mentor, like specifically in mental health or psychology, you have that mentor to talk to you when you're in one of those moods and feel down because they can help you so much and they know more information than most people do. And that's the best part about it because, you can seek help from a professional probably for free, which is the best part. And you really get to connect with someone that knows you very well to the point where they can just say you need to snap out of this, like you need to fix something in your life to make yourself happy. Like it can be like that. Some mentors are like that, some are not. But when someone says that to me at points, I'm honestly the happiest person in the world for some reason. You can be a good and very bad thing. But finding a mentor, specifically mental health, can be so powerful and so necessary if you are dealing with mental health challenges and seeking for help. You really should do it. It can really impact your life for the better.
Yeah, I completely agree.
To wrap this episode, I really appreciate you, Sadie, for coming on this episode. It was really great catching up with you again. And thank you for all the amazing work you're doing. I've been keeping up with tabs of all the work you've been doing. It's really amazing to see how much you have grown since the
Thank
last time we
you.
talked. I can't even remember since my brain is all like too lost, with every interview I do. But I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time. It was great catching up with you.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for listening. I'll make sure to put our social media links in our podcast in the description for you guys to check out. I totally recommend. And I will make sure to catch you guys on next week's episode. That one's gonna be very exciting. Make sure to subscribe, like, review, and I'll talk to you guys very soon.